WCW vs NWO World Tour. For many people, this is where the greatness began. As I talked about in my WrestleMania 2000 video, I've covered World Tour and Revenge previously, but looking back, I'm not happy with how that particular video came out, and I'm still not sure why I lumped both games together for one upload. There are many past videos I'd like to do again, not only because the quality was bad, but also because I may feel differently about certain topics, but I digress. Both WCW World Tour and Revenge deserve their own separate uploads, and they definitely deserve more love than what I gave them before. So let's do it. Let's look at WCW vs NWO World Tour and give it the recognition it really deserves. In 1996, a company named The Man Breeze released the first ever virtual pro wrestling game. Published by Asmic Ace Entertainment and released in Japan in September 96, Virtual Pro Wrestling was one of the first pro wrestling games to be completely in 3D and one of the first wrestling games to include multiple rosters from many different promotions. In March of 1997, the game made its way to the United States, localized as WCW vs. the World. And this is a game I remember having a lot of fun with when I got it for Christmas that year. Through this localized version of Virtual Pro Wrestling, WCW had a 3D wrestling game on the market before the WWF. Fans of the World Wrestling Federation were still waiting for Warzone to get released, and the most recent World Wrestling Federation game up until that point was In Your House. And if we're being honest here, In Your House didn't exactly set the world on fire. I still liked it though because I had no choice but to like it. WrestleMania the arcade game still leagues better, but beggars can't be choosers either. I've told this story before, but that Christmas I got WCW vs. the World, In Your House and Power Move Pro Wrestling from Santa Claus, and it was really Power Move and WCW that got the most play time. And even though on the grand scheme of things WCW vs. the World didn't look like much, it still played really well. The foundations were there for a very good game, and it did not take The Man Breeze and Asmic Ace long to work out how to make the game even better. Virtual Pro Wrestling was going to make its way to the N64. The Man Breeze changed their name to AKI. The developers looked at what was good about their first pro wrestling game and they got to work making it even better. Virtual Pro Wrestling 64 was released in Japan in late 1997, while WCW vs NWO World Tour was released around the same time in the United States. Now, calling the WCW game a reskin or a mere localization of Virtual Pro Wrestling 64 would be incredibly wrong. Both games do play the same, yet there's a lot of differences between the two. And in this video, we're going to look at a lot of these differences, and you're quickly going to realize that the Japanese game had much more going for it. Before we do that though, let's talk about what it's like to actually play these games, especially today when you could easily just play Revenge or No Mercy if you wanted to. Without going into details again about what each button does, you can see the WrestleMania 2000 video for all that stuff. I will say that when I first played this game all those years ago, I was legitimately blown away. In comparison to WCW vs. the World, this was really something else. The best way to describe it, keeping in mind that I'd never played an N64 AKI game up until that point, would be extremely smooth and extremely responsive. WCW vs. the World and Power Move Pro Wrestling had a little bit of awkwardness to them. The way the characters walked and the way they ran in the ring, the way your positioning had to be spot on, and in more general terms, the lack of overall freedom about what you could do in the ring was more or less gone when you first played WCW vs. NWO World Tour. Everything about the game was extremely solid from an in-ring perspective, and as soon as you finish one game, you wanted to play another. Now, in saying that, going back to World Tour nowadays is more of a nostalgia quest than anything else. There's some basic stuff missing here that would thankfully get added in newer AKI games, such as the ability to bring weapons into the ring, the ability to slide back inside the ropes by running, the ability to trigger your special meter instead of it happening automatically. There's plenty of these little things that you instantly notice are missing when playing World Tour again, and for that reason, new players might want to look at WCW Revenge or the other games that followed. But for those of you who remember playing this when it first got released, then man, you're going to get that nostalgia feeling as soon as you boot the game up again. The title screen music, the layout of the menu system with the wrestling ring being visible, the art used for the character select screen, even the wrestler models that look pretty grim in comparison to later games. You guys who first played this back in late 97 and 98 are gonna feel it for sure. In a gameplay sense, matches don't feel as long in World Tour. I'm not sure if this was simply due to the easier difficulty, even when set to hard. And overall, when playing today, it does feel more like a prototype for what was to come, but it's still great, and it's even better if you play using a real N64 controller. As a kid, I was amazed that all these wrestlers and all these moves were packed into a single game cartridge, but more than that, I was amazed at how well it all played. So amazed that I got completely addicted to this game. I had a PlayStation back then. I didn't have an N64. My friend would end up getting an N64 by the time Revenge was released. But before that, we had this shop close by where you could rent out consoles for the night. I must have rented that N64 of theirs about 6 or 7 times in the space of 2 months just so I could play World Tour. And you know, I probably could have saved that money and just bought the console and game, but that would have involved begging my parents for a little extra cash. We didn't have much money, and spending bits and pieces here and there was much more doable than putting down a lump sum of cash. And I'll always remember those nights sitting up in my bedroom until the wee hours playing this game and GoldenEye 007 over and over again. That's why I love this game. It brings me right back to a time in my life where I had no worries and didn't have any real responsibilities. And playing World Tour again today gives me back a little bit of that comfort, even if it's just for a few minutes. You guys will have your own games, movies, and music that does the exact same thing for you, so let me know in the comments what brings you back to those simpler times. Right, enough with all the emotional bollocks, let's get down to some serious business, some serious horseman business. WCW vs NWO World Tour has a few game modes, but nothing that's gonna blow your socks off. There's a WCW vs NWO mode. Pick a side, pick up to 5 wrestlers, and you'll compete in singles matches where the winner stays on. If you beat an opponent with 6, for example, then 6 is gonna continue on to face the next WCW wrestler. Keep going until one team has no wrestlers left, and congratulations, you now rule WCW. League Challenge mode is your standard arcade mode where you'll pick a promotion. The NWO and fictional promotions are included here, by the way, and you'll go through a series of matches to claim a championship. There's heavyweight, cruiserweight, and tag team championships to win, and this is where you'll unlock additional characters. In League mode, every wrestler has to fight each other while gaining points for wins. To win the league, you have to end the mode with the most points. And then there's a standard tournament mode. Nothing special, but incredible fun if you have a bunch of people over who want to become king of World Tour. Let's take a look at Virtual Pro Wrestling 64 though, and you're gonna quickly notice how much we got screwed over here. Champion Road is the same as League Challenge. 5-on-5 eliminations, the same as WCW vs NWO mode, only you're not restricted to just NWO and WCW guys. League modes in here, tournament modes in here. Battle Royals can be selected from the main menu, though do keep in mind you can also select these from the exhibition menu in the US game. But look, Wrestler Edit mode. In here you can change character costumes, character names, and you can even add masks that some of the wrestlers actually wore at one point in their careers. It's not a deep edit mode like WrestleMania 2000 or No Mercy. It's a bit more like the edit mode found in WCW Revenge, but it's still here, and I would have wasted so much time playing around with this when I was younger. It's a real shame it got cut from WCW World Tour. Next, let's look at the basic rosters. Here's the WCW vs NWO World Tour roster, and it's pretty good. You've got WCW guys such as Lex Luger, Sting, Ric Flair, the Steiner Brothers, and Eddie Guerrero to choose from. On the NWO side, we've got Hogan, The Outsiders, Bischoff, Vicious and Delicious, and Six. Again, it's a good selection here that at the time you really couldn't complain about. You've also got 4 costume slots that let you play as other versions of your favourite characters, including Surfer Sting or Red and Yellow Hulk Hogan. But it's a real shame that edit mode wasn't included here, so we could potentially add even more versions. We then get fictional characters based on real wrestlers found in the Japanese game. Hayabusa, for example, has been renamed Hannibal, and Taka Michinoku has been renamed Black Belt. Annoying, but understandable. There's also some hidden wrestlers to unlock, including Diamond Dallas Page, Macho Man Randy Savage, Wrath, Glacier, Joe Bruiser, who's actually Muhammad Ali, and Black Widow, who's actually the legendary Manami Toyota. You may be thinking this is a good roster, and indeed it is a good roster, but wait until you see who you can select in the Japanese game. Now, I'm one of those people who kinda get annoyed when others point out you should have played this version instead, or you don't get the full experience because of this, that, or the other. Another pet peeve of mine is when people point out you should have watched this show with subtitles instead of the inferior dubbed version, you know, that kind of stuff. All these kind of things drive me fucking insane, because if I wanted to do something like that, I would have made the conscious effort to do so in the first place. With that in mind though, what I'm about to say next really makes me feel like a prick, so apologies in advance. But if you're going to play this game today, I highly recommend ditching WCW World Tour in favour of Virtual Pro Wrestling 64, and that's because of the roster. Better yet, download the English translation patch. There's still a few spelling mistakes here and there, and some of the font sizes aren't right, but just look at this. Neo Strong Style's a New Japan roster with guys like Tatsumi Fujinami, Masahiro Chono, Jushin Liger, and the Great Muta. Empire Wrestling's an All Japan roster with guys like Kenta Kobashi, Steve Williams, Stan Hansen, and Jumbo Tsuruta. The Wrestle of Universe roster's a Shoot Fight roster with Ken Shamrock, Baz Rutten, and Minoru Suzuki. Dead or Alive's a Wrestle and Romance or Wrestling Association R and FMW roster with folks like Tenryu, Onita, Vader, and the Road Warriors. And finally, Michinoku Pro's represented in the Independent Local League with the Great Sasuke, Taka Michinoku, Dick Togo, and others. If this isn't enough for some reason, check out the Legends roster. Inoki, Baba, Terry Funk, Mil Mascaras, Bruiser Brody, Dynamite Kid, Dos Caras, Andre the Giant. Guys, we got robbed. We really did. And yes, I know it comes down to licensing and all that, but the sheer amount of additional characters in VPW 64 makes it the better game by default. Not even mentioning the additional moves and additional fight styles that come along with it. It's not just the roster and edit modes that make VPW 64 different than WCW World Tour though. There's a few other curious differences that are worth talking about. Glacier and Wrath are not included in the Japanese game. Maybe Glacier was too awesome for Japanese players, I don't know. But neither he nor his Blood Run's Cold Enemy are available in Virtual Pro Wrestling 64. Costumes are also different. In the Japanese game, you can select Eddie Guerrero's Black Tiger outfit, and Chris Benoit's been given multiple attires that go back to his days in Japan. Even Wild Pegasus is included here. And there's other small differences, including Hulk Hogan having slightly different colours for his ring gear. Diamond Dallas Page and Randy Savage do not need to be unlocked in VPW 64. However, DDP does not have the Diamond Cutter as his finisher in the Japanese release. Instead, he has a twirling powerbomb, which is a move he performed in real life, by the way. Scott Hall has the incorrect sit-down crucifix powerbomb in WCW World Tour, yet the correct version of the Outsider's Edge is doable in the Japanese game. And just generally speaking, the finishing moves in both games are a little weird. Sting, for example, has the Deathlock and Death Drop as regular moves, yet like so many other wrestlers in the game, his finisher is a powerbomb. So in regards to finishers and the choice of moves that wrestlers have been given, things could have been a bit more authentic if the developers took greater care in their selections. To be fair too, AKI were only starting off here. They would absolutely 100% make up for this in WCW Revenge, and their subsequent games would feature much more personality for each and every wrestler. But it is worth mentioning that the move selections could have been better for both World Tour and Virtual Pro Wrestling 64. Things like the Diamond Cutter being missing in the Japanese game and the Outsider's Edge being wrong in the US game though, that stuff's a bit weird. These games were developed at the exact same time, so I've no idea how they messed these up. Some might say there's enough in the US release to warrant choosing it over the Japanese release, but I don't really think the Diamond Cutter, Glacier, and Wrath make up for the additional stuff you get in Virtual Pro Wrestling 64. Something else that makes the Japanese release better is the fact that matches get scored after the final bell. The moves you pull off, the audience's reaction, and the appeal of the match itself get scored, and these scores are derived from how well you played. Reversing moves, pulling off aerial attacks, and delivering special moves will make your match score higher, and finding a good balance between strike moves and grapple moves also has an effect on your final score. You can also save this data to your own personal profile, meaning you can get an aggregate score for all the matches you compete in and see your average performance numbers across multiple matchups. This is a great feature that becomes excellent once you've unlocked every wrestler and won every championship. With these early AKI games, you basically have nothing to do but play exhibition matches once you've done everything else. So with this system in place, you could potentially try and have better exhibition matches in order to get better scores. A friend can also join in and save their scores against your scores, allowing you to see a detailed breakdown of how you wrestle matches in comparison to your buddies. I am not exaggerating, I would have absolutely loved this. I talked about how my friend and I used to try and beat our match scores in WCW Revenge, and it got to the point where we'd need to wrestle hour-long matches in hopes of getting ranked. The system used in Virtual Pro Wrestling 64 is maybe even better because of the amount of detailed information you get about each and every match, and the fact that all your data can be combined makes it even more compelling for score junkies. Again, why this was cut out of WCW vs NWO World Tour, I have no idea. Maybe AKI thought us fans in Europe and America wouldn't care for details and all we wanted to do was wrestle each other. Maybe there's underlying issues with the scoring system that we don't know about and they thought it would be better if they just remove it altogether. I don't know. But finding all this stuff out was a revelation for me, and I can only imagine how many more hours I would have wasted on this game had this scoring feature been included in World Tour. As a matter of fact, I would love to see this in modern wrestling games. With GM mode being back, you could really get into the nitty gritty of match performances and stuff like that, but I also know that's asking way too much of 2K. Instead, we're supposed to get excited when old match types get brought back to new games, and I guess it works too. So yeah, this is all wishful thinking on my behalf. When WCW World Tour got released, some reviewers didn't know what to think of the grapple system. It's kinda funny looking back on now, but it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. GameSpot said, "A sense of timing is required not only to find holes in your opponent's defenses, but also to find points at which the Nintendo 64 will allow you to perform moves at all." I have absolutely no idea what GameSpot were smoking here because this was easily the most responsive wrestling game to hit the market at that time. So yeah, I just find this comment to be totally inaccurate. Put it this way, test the responsiveness of WCW World Tour against WWF in your house. You'll soon realize what responsiveness is all about. IGN, meanwhile, said, "Everything works quite well despite some instinctive button mashing and slow moving wrestlers at times." Again, compare World Tour to In Your House. What game are you more likely to button mash in? I really don't know anyone who button mashed in AKI wrestling games. There's absolutely no reason to. Well, maybe when you're getting reacquainted with the countering and reversal system, although that takes what, 2 or 3 matches maximum? Nintendo Power was a bit more complimentary though. They said, "The great thing about this game is that you can do a lot without knowing a lot, which makes it perfect for multiplayer matches when 1 or more players may be new to the game." Overall, reviews were pretty positive though, and World Tour was awarded Console Fighting Game of the Year by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, now known as the DICE Awards. It defeated Bloody Roar, Bushido Blade, Street Fighter EX Plus Alpha, and WCW Nitro. The following year, WCW Revenge won the award, but in 1999-2000, WWF WrestleMania was beaten by Namco's Soul Calibur. World Tour sold 1.3 million copies in the United States, making it the second best-selling wrestling game on N64 and overall one of the console's best-selling games of all time. But it does make you wonder, doesn't it? What if World Tour had the same roster as Virtual Pro Wrestling 64? What if it had the edit mode and the additional scoring system in place? Maybe it could have done even better in terms of reception and sales. So my recommendation is getting yourself the translation patch for Virtual Pro Wrestling 64 and enjoying the game to the absolute maximum. I'm in no way dismissing WCW World Tour because I absolutely adored that game, but playing its Japanese counterpart feels like playing the full completed version of the game. If you don't feel like patching the game yourself, or if you don't know how to, Google is your friend. You can find pre-patch versions quite easily, and yes, if you still have your N64 or if you're in the market for one, you can play the patch version just fine on original hardware. I recorded this video using an emulator on PC, and this is going to sound very pretentious, but do trust me on this, there's nothing quite like playing this game on an original N64 with the original controller. If you can sway one of your old buddies to come around to relive the glory days, then even better. Both World Tour and VPW 64 are not the best AKI wrestling games. The improvements made over time make it obsolete, especially for folks who have no nostalgic attachments to the games at all. But for those who played World Tour all those years ago, this game still holds up in terms of its overall charm. If you remember that feeling when you played World Tour for the very first time, then you're going to have a lot of fun going back to it. If you had no idea at all about the changes made between World Tour and Virtual Pro Wrestling 64, then you're in for a real treat when you play the Japanese game. And personally speaking, I love digging into both games to see what was different and what was added and what was removed. I find all this kind of stuff very fascinating. I know, I'm such an exciting person. But thank you for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll get working on an updated WCW Revenge video very soon. Again, thank you for watching, and please take care. Here it is, WCW Revenge, my favourite of all the AKI games, and that includes WWF No Mercy. If you watch my WrestleMania 2000 video, then you'll understand why I enjoy Revenge so much, even though it was surpassed by WrestleMania 2000 and No Mercy in terms of graphics, modes and gameplay. I know subsequent AKI games had more to offer, but Revenge was the game I spent the most time with, and it's a game I have great memories of in regards to multiplayer. Besides my personal feelings though, this is the quintessential World Championship Wrestling video game. The WCW game for NES wasn't great, the unreleased UWC game is interesting, but it's still an NES wrestling game at the end of the day. The main event on Game Boy wasn't bad as far as handheld games go, but it still doesn't come recommended. Super Brawl on Super Nintendo is unintentionally hilarious and a game I will cover soon, but yeah, it's not for me. And then we had WCW vs. the World on PlayStation 1 and WCW World Tour on N64. The PS1 game was decent, but World Tour on N64 blew it out of the water thanks to having a much tighter and more refined grapple system in place. Let's not forget about WCW Nitro. Nitro was released on PlayStation 1 about 10 months before WCW Revenge. While the roster for that game was good, matches could be pretty chaotic thanks to some serious messy gameplay and button combinations that half of the time didn't work. Once you played Nitro on PS1, you quickly realised you needed an N64 if you wanted the best WCW game up until this point, and at that very time, WCW vs NWO World Tour was still king of the mountain. But because World Tour was developed alongside its Japanese counterpart, Virtual Pro Wrestling 64, it kinda had to share its identity with a game that wasn't based on World Championship Wrestling alone. VPW included wrestlers from All Japan Pro Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, FMW, Michinoku Pro, and others. And while it's fantastic that a game exists that features so many wrestlers from different organizations, it also meant the WCW brand itself was kinda limited within the game. Revenge completely fixes this identity issue by giving fans a pure WCW game that separates itself from World Tour thanks to its excellent presentation, excellent use of source material, and gameplay that exceeds its predecessor in every single way. Let's check out WCW Revenge and let me explain why this is my favourite wrestling game of all time. Revenge was released in October 98 in North America and November 98 in Europe. THQ showed the game off at the 1998 European Computer Trade Show, along with Rugrats Scavenger Hunt. Revenge was much closer to completion though, and folks were able to see a build of the game that was said to be around 85% complete. The following month, THQ announced that the World Tour cartridge size was doubled for WCW Revenge, all to allow more wrestlers to be included in the game. And IGN posted an extensive list of new features the game was set to include, making WCW Revenge almost too good to be true when compared to every other wrestling game on the market. Among these new features included 700 frames of animation per wrestler, 300 unique wrestling moves, real pay-per-view arenas, over 80 wrestlers to choose from, although all these weren't WCW or NWO guys, and the costume edit mode from VPW 64 was also set to be included. One feature that was advertised but wasn't actually available in the final build was the ability to track wins and losses for each individual superstar, but that's fine, we still had high scores in the final game. IGN also posted the official roster before the game got released, and it looked incredibly good. The roster was finalized just before the summer of 1998, so we have the company represented by wrestlers fighting on TNT at the height of the Monday Night Wars. Sting, Hogan, Nash, Hall, Luger, Goldberg, DDP, Raven, Jericho, Brett, pretty much anyone you'd want to play as was represented in the game, except for El Dandy. Ric Flair did not make the cut. He and Bischoff had not settled their legal dispute when the roster got finalized, so no Slick Rick unfortunately. And another guy who didn't get included in the game, but he was mentioned as a playable character before release, was Wrath. The data for Wrath is still in the game though, and he is selectable through a GameShark code. There was a slight delay getting copies shipped to stores in North America, but gamers and pro wrestling fans alike were very eager to get their hands on this one. Remember, WWF fans were still playing Warzone when this bad boy hit the shelves.
What?
First, the intro video. If you know, you know. How many times would you just let this whole thing play out before starting your first round of exhibition matches? From the guy with Ming's face driving the truck to Sting looking all moody and shit. From the NWO talking trash backstage to the action inside the ring. Is this a contender for best opening to a wrestling game ever? I'd say it is for sure, but at the same time, I'm biased. The music during the intro is brilliant too, as is the music throughout the entire game. You guys who watch Reliving the War every week can put two and two together here, and you guys would already know how much I love the Revenge soundtrack. Getting into the game's main menu, and admittedly, it's bare bones. It's even more bare than World Tour, but don't worry, the real content of Revenge is inside the ring. With Revenge having no Japanese counterpart, no Japanese rosters, and with the game not even getting translated for a release in Japan, AKI were able to dedicate absolutely everything about this game to WCW, and it shows in the main menu. Whatever arena you wrestled in last, you'll see its entranceway as you select a game mode, and this status saves when turning off the console, so you'll always remember where your last epic battle took place. Modes are limited. You've got Championship mode, an Exhibition mode, Special Match mode that lets you pick Battle Royals or Handicap matches, and you've also got Costume Change mode along with some options. Costume Change mode is more or less the same as VPW 64 here, and you'll be able to change the attires and colours of those attires for your favourite superstars. Each wrestler has 4 costume slots, so if you want to give everyone in the game an NWO shirt, you're more than welcome to do so. Exhibitions are basic, you can only play singles or tags here. As mentioned, Battle Royals and Handicap matches are available in the special menu, but it's worth noting too that cage matches were once considered for this game, but they didn't make the final cut. A GameShark code brings back the graphic for cage matches, and the graphic replaces handicap matches, but if you start a game with this code, you'll just play a regular 2-on-1 match. Championship modes where you'll unlock new superstars, but we'll talk about this mode in just a moment. First, let's take a look at the roster, the very best WCW roster that's ever been included in a video game. There's 4 rosters within the game: NWO Black and White, NWO Wolfpack, Raven's Flock, and WCW. The cover of the game featured members of each of these rosters, and it's pretty awesome that Raven got included in the cover alongside the company's big boys. The Black and White roster has guys like Hogan, Giant, Buff Bagwell, and Scott Norton. The Wolfpack features Sting, Nash, Conan, and Randy Savage. Raven's Flock is where you'll find Raven, Kidman, Scotty Riggs, and Big Reese's Pieces. Van Hammer and Perry Saturn are also in the game, but when the roster was finalised, these lads had already left Raven's flock. And the WCW roster features guys like DDP, Goldberg, Roddy Piper, Ming, Disco Inferno, and Alex Wright. Bret Hart's here as a WCW guy, even though he was associated with the NWO during this time period. He's even seen with the NWO squad during the video's intro. And there's another subsection of the WCW roster that's filled with cruiserweights and luchadors. We once again have fictional wrestlers in a WCW game. These guys have movesets based on wrestlers working in Japan, but their appearance varies greatly. And then we have the legend himself, AKI Man and his alter ego THQ Man. Seriously, this dude plays brilliantly in the game. He's a lot of fun to control. All in all, it's a fantastic roster, and if you've been following the Reliving the War series, then you'll notice that everyone you'd expect is represented here. Entrances were not available in World Tour, but we have them here in Revenge. Granted, it's an animation pose at the entranceway followed by another in the ring, but it's better than nothing, and technically still more than what WWF No Mercy would offer in the future. Certain wrestlers have managers and valets, with many of these being unselectable as playable characters. If you want to play as a manager, press the Z button on the third or fourth controller while a manager stands outside the ring. The first thing that really grabbed me when starting my first game of WCW Revenge all those years ago was how well the arena and ring looked. Nitro, Sold Out, Super Brawl, Bash at the Beach, Halloween Havoc and Starrcade are all selectable in the game, and each setup looks different from one another. This is something I really liked because, well, put it this way, look at Warzone. Every match looked the exact same in Warzone, and it felt like the ring was just dumped in a wide open space with no character and no personality. It looks dull in comparison to the vibrant arenas found in WCW Revenge. The audience in Revenge also feels closer to the ring, it looks more exciting, and you gotta give it to AKI for how they captured the look and feel of actual WCW events. Back then, this was incredible for wrestling fans who wanted something that actually represented the shows they watched on TV. World Tour dropped the ball when it came to WCW venues, but that's because it wasn't strictly a WCW game. In Revenge, AKI totally made up for it though, and now you can relive classic Nitro matches or pay-per-view main events. Something you just couldn't do in previous games with this level of authenticity. Now, gameplay, this is where things get good. Whereas WCW vs NWO World Tour had a lot of guys who played very similar to each other, AKI made sure to make each and every wrestler in Revenge feel unique. One way they accomplished this was through new taunts that were taken directly from what the developers saw on TV. And another way AKI accomplished this uniqueness was by creating new updated move animations made specifically for individual wrestlers. For example, Lex Luger's got his running forearm shot, something he'd do in almost every match, and only Luger can do this move in the game. Whereas Chris Benoit was given his hook clothesline, a move that he too would do frequently when wrestling on TV. In World Tour, both Benoit and Luger would have been given the same running clothesline and fans would have been happy with it, but in Revenge, these new animations made all the difference when playing as certain wrestlers. More care was taken when it came to special moves. For example, Nash's jackknife powerbomb looks way more authentic this time around, and going back to Benoit for a moment, I was absolutely addicted to pulling off his crossface from an Irish whip because he'd performed the arm trap beforehand. And just the feel of pulling off moves in Revenge, it's so satisfying. Those of you who've played the game will know exactly what I'm talking about, and it's so hard to explain to those who have never experienced it before. But trust me, although it's overall very simplistic, there's still something really great about laying someone out with a Scorpion Death Drop or launching your opponent high in the air before dropping him with a Diamond Cutter. Away from this, AKI also tweaked and enhanced the fundamentals to make the game better than its predecessor in almost every single way. Small things were fixed, such as the ability to bring a weapon into the ring and the ability to trigger your spirit meter anytime you wanted, so long as your spirit meter was flashing red. There's also more moves available at your disposal, more defensive moves to help you counter, dodge, or avoid your opponent altogether. Mark Curtis is also here as our referee. He's represented by a cartoon drawn, and it's great to have WCW's greatest ever official immortalized in the game. The heart of Revenge lies in its gameplay, no two ways about it. But let's take a look at the other modes on offer because, well, it won't take very long. In Championship mode, you'll fight for the TV, US Cruiserweight Tag and World Championships. Winning a belt will unlock some new wrestlers, those being Kurt Hennig, Billy Kidman, The Faces of Fear, Chris Kanyon and Roddy Piper. Championship mode's your basic arcade mode where you just fight a bunch of guys one after another, but there is a little replay value in the scoring system. Not only does Revenge score your exhibition matches and save those to a table, but your whole championship run will also get scored, so you can always try going back to fill that high score table with nothing but your name. Admittedly, there's not much else to do really. The special matches are just more exhibition matches, so once you're done winning all the belts, you're either going to edit a bunch of superstar costumes or you're heading back into exhibition mode. But again, this is absolutely fine because playing matches in this game with its huge WCW and NWO roster is where all the fun is really. For sure, it would have been nice to have some sort of career mode similar to WrestleMania 2000, and I've often thought having No Mercy story mode with Revenge's roster would have been the ultimate wrestling game for me, but beggars can't be choosers either. My buddy got Revenge about a month or two after it came out, and those high score tables were ours to dominate. We spent so much time beating our old scores that at one point we needed to play nearly hour-long matches just in hopes of getting ranked somewhere near the bottom. We got addicted to those high score tables, and if we were playing against each other, we'd have to agree not to try to pin or submit each other for at least 45 minutes. That's how bad it got. Some of my favourite best memories are tied up in Revenge thanks to its multiplayer mode. 4-player was also loads of fun with tag team matches and battle royals causing chaos both in and out of the game, and it's those memories that make this the best wrestling game ever for me. I talked about this already in my WrestleMania 2000 upload, but if you watch that video you'd know where I'm coming from here. Revenge may not be known universally as the best wrestling game ever, but for me it certainly is. Right, modders, you lovely, lovely people. The folks who dig deep into these games are the true heroes of the community, and it was a discovery made by a certain individual on Twitter that made me look into Revenge mods and hacks that expand upon an already brilliant game. Melonbread1979 has been posting some really interesting facts and tidbits about the AKI games for a long time, and learning about what goes on in the background while playing these games fascinates me a great deal. Melonbread found something really interesting in Revenge though, and that was running special moves. In WCW NWO Revenge, run and grapple moves aren't possible, but by digging through the game code, this modder found that AKI had once considered having running special moves included in the game, but it was cut out for reasons unknown. By using the GameShark code, we can add running special moves back in. DDP can perform a running diamond cutter, which means in total Paige has 4 variants of the diamond cutter included in this game. So obviously I wanted to show you guys this in today's video, and that led me to Virtual Pro Wrestling Salvo, a mod of Revenge that not only includes all the running special moves that were previously inaccessible, but it also includes new roster additions that I think you guys will get a kick out of. VPW Salvo was developed by Ragdaz, a well-respected modder in the community from what I can tell, who also released other mods including La Fin de Tour, Summit VPW and WCW NWO Revenge. His VPW Salvo mod includes the running special moves as previously mentioned, but he's also included Ric Flair and NWO Sting, a character who does exist on the original cartridge but was dummied out of the final game. A WWF roster has also been included, taking assets from future AKI games and bringing them back to Revenge, and all the fictional characters from Revenge have been given their true identities, which means we can now play as Kenta Kobashi, Steve Williams, Jumbo Tsuruta and others. This mod will also work on your Nintendo 64 console via a NeverDrive cartridge, and as a matter of fact, you probably want to play it on an actual console because, well, from what I've gathered reading the mod description, Ragdaz has pushed Revenge to its very limit by adding these new additions, and for some reason N64 emulators don't like it too much. If more than 2 characters are on screen while playing on an emulator, the game suffers from slowdown, but when playing on a console, this problem seems to disappear. So if you've got the means to play this on original hardware, then that's definitely the way to go. It might even play better with a 64DD, but I unfortunately don't have that particular add-on to experiment with. Don't let this slowdown hinder your perception of this mod though. The author said that he made this mod for himself really, and it was more of a one thing leads to another type of deal, which would see him adding more and more new things as development progressed. There's a certain amount of downgrading going on too when you think about improvements made in future AKI games. The People's Elbow, for example, just isn't possible in Revenge due to the initial pose and run animations not being available yet, whereas this kind of animation sequence, among others, wouldn't be possible until WrestleMania 2000 and No Mercy. The fact that this modder took the time to be as strategic as possible when it came to what could and couldn't be included is worthy of praise in itself, because this isn't as simple as copying all the data from one game and pasting it into another. There's a shit ton of work here that's way beyond my comprehension, and I'm just glad folks are still working on these games to provide us with new features and new wrestlers. This is a great mod. I only started playing it to see the running specials, but I quickly found myself having those 1998 Monday Night War fantasy matches that we all talked about at one point or another. And the great thing is, there's still a lot more for these guys to discover, and there's things that have been discovered that still need put into playable builds of the game. If you appreciate any of this stuff the way I do, or if you're just curious about how it all works, give guys like Ragdaz and Melonbread1979 a follow on Twitter. It's still amazing to me that we're finding out new things about this game some 25 years later. It's kinda bittersweet going back to WCW Revenge all these years later. It's so much fun playing the game again, and seeing as I just covered this era and reliving the war, my memory's razor sharp in regards to the taunts that are used, the attires the developers selected, and the moves each wrestler performs in the ring. At the same time, that was 25 years ago. Games in general look a lot better now. I don't hang out with those same old friends I once did, and I no longer have the time to sit up until the early hours to put my name all over a high score table. I could do it if I really wanted to, but I know I wouldn't get the same feeling of accomplishment anymore because, well, it feels kinda pointless now. Through work, responsibilities, bills to pay, appointments to attend, anytime I get a chance to play a game nowadays, I'm stealing half an hour here and there, and I feel that that time would probably be spent better playing other games. I recently bought Final Fantasy Rebirth for myself, and I pre-ordered WWE 2K24, and I have absolutely no idea how and when I'll get a chance to play those. And you know, I kinda want to keep it that way when it comes to Revenge. Inside that cartridge holds a little time machine that I can put on and go back to the good times, back when there were no responsibilities and no worries. If I decided to play the game to death again, then I'm afraid that magic may disappear, so I'm going to leave it as it is, and I'll play it again when I want that quick hit of nostalgia. Going through the comments in the WrestleMania 2000 video, I noticed that many of you guys feel the same way, not only about the AKI games, but for other games too, along with movies, music, TV shows, all that stuff. Things from the past that take you away from the stress of the present. Really, it's the kind of shit I live for, if I'm honest. I don't know why, but comforts from the past seem to work brilliantly for me when it comes to relaxing and turning my brain off for a while. And as silly as it sounds, that's really what WCW Revenge does for me. When you've got something that reminds you about the best times of your life, it's only natural to go back to it every once in a while, as long as it's not your crazy ex who began stalking you, or that time you overdosed at a friend's birthday party. I hope this video brought you back to those easier times, even if it was just for 20 minutes or so. Thank you for watching, guys, and please take care. When we discuss the now legendary N64 AKI wrestling games, where does WrestleMania 2000 actually stand? It's kinda like the black sheep of the group nowadays, and some might even say it's a pretty pointless game when you look at the other options available. WCW vs NWO World Tour or Virtual Pro Wrestling N64 are noteworthy for being the first AKI wrestling games to make their way to Nintendo's 64-bit console, so they'll always serve as a curiosity, two games that let players see how it all began. You've then got WCW Revenge, which is arguably the greatest WCW video game ever released, and it serves as the game for fans of World Championship Wrestling. You then move on to Virtual Pro Wrestling 2, which many people believe is the absolute best AKI wrestling game of the entire bunch, thanks to its deeper gameplay mechanics and legendary roster. And WWF fans would call No Mercy on N64 the best WWF or WWE game that's ever been released. So why bother playing WrestleMania 2000 when you've got all these other games to look at? Why play the AKI wrestling game that many consider a weaker version of Virtual Pro Wrestling 2? A game devoid of those deeper gameplay mechanics that made Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 so well revered, even though Mania 2000 was developed at the exact same time. Not gonna lie, out of all the AKI games, Mania 2000 would also be my last choice, but you gotta remember when this game came out, and you also gotta remember what came before it. Before Mania 2000, WWF fans who owned an N64 had two options: WWF Warzone and WWF Attitude. These games were serviceable and I had fun playing them on the PlayStation, but the WCW games on N64 were miles better. I dare say a lot of WWF fans were quite envious of the WCW games back then, because I know for sure I was. So when the World Wrestling Federation switched developers and the same guys who made World Tour and Revenge were set to make a new WWF game, it was almost too good to be true. In late 1999, when this game got released, it was highly relevant. It was very important. It's been surpassed for sure, and when looking at the AKI N64 collection, it does feel like you've got way better options. But until No Mercy came out, WrestleMania 2000 served as the top dog for N64 owners who also happened to be Grapple fans. Well, top dog for those who didn't import Japanese games. So let's check out WrestleMania 2000 in today's video, and let's give AKI's first WWF game a little appreciation. WCW Revenge was a massive success for AKI and publisher THQ. The WWF took notice and they decided they wanted a piece of the action. THQ envisioned AKI working to bring out WCW and WWF games at the same time for the Nintendo 64, but WCW decided they did not want to share game developers with their biggest rival. WCW cancelled their existing deal with THQ and AKI. They decided to look for a new studio and developer for future releases, and so the WWF were set to get a brand new N64 game, while WCW NWO Revenge would serve as the final World Championship Wrestling game using the famous AKI engine. THQ were under legal obligation to release one more WCW game for the N64 though, so they got Inland Productions to port their questionable WCW Nitro game from the PlayStation 1 onto the N64. A pretty terrible way for WCW to end their run on Nintendo's 5th generation console. Still, I have nothing but great memories of WCW World Tour and Revenge. I still own copies of both games, and I still own my copy of WrestleMania 2000. But there was absolutely no way I was going to use that cartridge for this video review. Let me show you. This right here is what a PAL copy of WrestleMania 2000 plays like. This was recorded directly from my console, and yes, it does feel like the characters are moving around underwater. The explanation is simple. Electric frequency in most European regions was usually 50 Hz. Our TVs usually had a 50 Hz refresh rate, and therefore our frame rates were typically around 25 or 50. Our NTSC buddies in North America had a frequency of 60 Hz, meaning you guys in America typically got games at 30 or 60 frames per second. Have a look at some NTSC footage I recorded using an EverDrive and you'll instantly notice the difference. WrestleMania 2000 and most other games would run at a rate locked to how fast the game was refreshed. As time went on, more developers started including a 50 Hz mode in their games, but back then the easiest thing to do was to slow the NTSC game down by a sixth so it could run on a 50 Hz screen, effectively saving the developers having to recode the entire game or at least add optimizations. As kids, we knew none of this shit. The PAL game looks really slow nowadays, but back then we thought this was normal. But trying to play the PAL version now really isn't fun, so I opted to emulate the game instead, and all footage you'll see here is recorded using Project 64. Look at WrestleMania 2000 when upscaled on a PC. The difference is absolutely incredible. I don't think I described how to actually play these games when covering World Tour and Revenge years ago, but let me quickly demonstrate the beautiful simplicity of the AKI wrestling engine. Tap B for a quick strike. You can tap B while pressing back or towards on the D-pad for more strikes. Hold B for a strong strike. You can hold in a direction or tap A and B together to perform more strong strikes. Tap A for a quick lockup, allowing you to perform quick grapple moves by using A again with or without a direction, or B with or without a direction. You can also Irish whip from a lockup by pressing the C down button. C down also lets you run, and you can pull off running strikes while dashing at your opponent. However, WrestleMania does not include running grapples. A little odd seeing as Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 allowed these kind of moves. The L and R shoulder buttons act as your defensive buttons, R for blocking and countering strikes, L for dodging or reversing grapples. You can hold R when getting to your feet to stay low and wait for the right time to grapple or strike your opponent, though this is a defensive move that can only be pulled off when you've been put on the canvas. You've got a spirit meter at the bottom of the screen, known as the Attitude Meter in WrestleMania 2000, and when this begins flashing red, you can flick the analog stick to go into the special state. When in the special state, you can then perform your finishing move. One of the great things about the AKI games are the amount of specials and special variations that are available, so take the time to experiment with your favourite wrestler to find out all their special moves. These basics will be enough to get you started, but you really need to play these games for yourself to understand why they're so well regarded. WrestleMania 2000 and indeed all AKI N64 games feel like no other wrestling game you've ever played before. There's a real addictive quality to playing matches, and that addictive quality is what many wrestling games have lacked since AKI stopped developing grapplers. The way you lock up, the defensive moves, the spirit meter implementation, just how a match progresses. These games are still so much fun to play today, and as I talked about in the Challenge 64 video, I'm so happy that there's still a thriving community out there tearing these games apart to create new mods and updated versions of the all-time classics. I'm sure there's many people out there who look at these games without ever playing them, wondering what all the fuss is about. I mean, admittedly, they don't look brilliant in terms of character models and whatnot, but I do hope new grapple fans take the time to give WrestleMania 2000 and other AKI wrestling games a chance. The games may not look very pretty today, but I guarantee you're going to have a lot of fun playing matches, especially if you can convince a buddy to play some two-player games. Before looking at the modes on offer, here's the game's entire unlocked roster. It's kind of funny because we're only a month or two away from seeing this roster in my Reliving the War video series, so it's been fun playing as these guys again while seeing what they've been up to on Raw's War around the same time period. The selection here is pretty good, though if I'm honest, I prefer the roster in WCW Revenge. There's a way better selection of cruiserweights in Revenge, and it kinda feels like a lot of the guys in WrestleMania play the same. On top of this, you've also got what I consider a much better roster available in WWF No Mercy. So yeah, while WrestleMania 2000 selection is fine, it has been surpassed by games that came before it and after it. In terms of match types, we can now have triple threat matches, a first blood modifier, and also a cage match. All these things are welcome additions, seeing as Revenge was a bit lacking in match variety, although to be fair, WrestleMania 2000 could have done with even more match variety. Speaking of first blood matches, apparently some versions of this game remove bleeding altogether while some early copies still have it. Strangely, while playing the ROM I downloaded, I couldn't bust my opponent open even though the animation played out to show that he had been bleeding. But then, later on, the blood was visible during another match. Not sure why this happened, but yeah, not all versions let you get colour, but the first blood modifier is retained on all releases. King of the Ring mode has been added here where you can set up your very own tournament. The Royal Rumble's here and it plays out just like the Revenge Battle Royal, only this time you have a maximum of 30 superstars instead of 40. You've also got the Road to WrestleMania mode, but I'll talk about that a bit more in just a moment. In terms of overall presentation, WrestleMania 2000 got a huge upgrade over Revenge when it came to entrances. I know these look pretty weak nowadays, but having full entrance animations along with actual theme music was a pretty big deal back then. The theme music does sound heavily compressed, but it's a huge upgrade from Revenge's 2 or 3 MIDI themes that played for every wrestler in the game. So it's good to have a little bit more authenticity before matches take place. Entrances are cut short in WWF No Mercy, by the way, so many people think WrestleMania 2000's the king in terms of making an entrance. Something else that was greatly expanded upon in WrestleMania 2000 were the creation modes. You can now create a championship belt, although to be fair, there's minimal design choices. The WWF Light Heavyweight belt was cut from the game, though it is accessible with a Game Shark code. The colour's a little bright to say the least, but it's there if you want it. You can create and save a pay-per-view, allowing you to set out a card full of matches to play over and over again. And then there's the Create a Wrestler mode, the first time AKI incorporated such a mode in an N64 wrestling game. Revenge did let you edit wrestlers, but you could never create someone from scratch. So now you have the opportunity to make an original character or create a sneaky WCW superstar from parts carried over from the previous game. You might even find a few All Japan or New Japan guys in here. If you like editing superstars already featured in the game, then this is also available. Again, you could do this in Revenge, but now you've got way more options along with the ability to clone a superstar. At the time, this was pretty amazing, and yes, everything about these creation modes were quickly surpassed by No Mercy, but you gotta put yourself back to late 1999 and forget that No Mercy or even Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 even existed. Speaking of Virtual Pro Wrestling 2, players had the ability in that game to alter CPU logic and how the CPU controlled each character. This mode was included in WrestleMania 2000, however it was cut out before release. If you enter this ridiculous Game Shark code, you can actually bring the mode back to WrestleMania 2000, so while it's cool that this cut content can be resurrected, it does make you wonder why it got removed in the first place. Animations for mixed martial artists were also cut from WrestleMania 2000, takedown and submission moves that are a part of VPW2 got removed, and the combo strike grapples that were available in Revenge and Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 also got cut from WrestleMania 2000, although the data for these unique attacks are still sitting there on the cartridge completely unused. It's these kind of things that make people prefer Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 over WrestleMania 2000, especially in modern times. The language barrier is no longer an issue with VPW2 thanks to English patches getting released, and fans can even opt for the excellent Freedom Edition mod that also works on real hardware. So you can maybe see now why WrestleMania 2000 becomes a bit redundant nowadays when these other options are available. Of course, you can't really compare the roster and overall presentation of WrestleMania 2000 to anything else. This is a pure 1999 Attitude Era video game that represents a time in history when the World Wrestling Federation were absolutely dominant against their competition, but folks discovering the AKI games for the first time will likely brush WrestleMania 2000 off because there are better options out there. This, however, does not apply to those who have fond memories of first owning Mania 2000 all those years ago, and there's very valid reasons why people would prefer this game over the likes of VPW2 and No Mercy. But I'll talk about all that towards the end of the video. We need to take a quick look at the Road to WrestleMania mode first of all. Let's start with a positive. WrestleMania 2000's main single player experience is a lot better than what was on offer in WCW Revenge. Revenge featured a basic arcade style single player mode where you beat a bunch of guys, win a championship belt and unlock a wrestler. WrestleMania 2000 goes way beyond that by giving players a calendar, a ton of belts to go after, a King of the Ring tournament to win, a Royal Rumble to win, all while every victory and every loss is tracked as you work a WWF TV schedule each and every week. This is fine, it's way better than what came before it, and it's good the players had a single player experience that they could really get lost in. A few problems though. First of all, the cutscenes. Cutscenes are few and far between, and the cutscenes we do get make very little sense. I can't be too hard here because Revenge had absolutely nothing in terms of promos or things that remotely progress the story, so while the cutscenes are bad, at least it's something. Secondly, the difficulty spikes. WrestleMania 2000's Road to WrestleMania mode will kick your ass after playing for a few months, and match difficulty gets ramped up big time for title matches and pay-per-view matches. It feels unfair at times, seeing as you can do well on Raw and Sunday Night Heat, and then when the pay-per-view comes you're getting completely smoked by some random mid-carder. Third and finally, the random match generator seems a bit odd. I started a new season with Ken Shamrock and I must have wrestled about 5 tag team matches in the space of 2 months against Draws and Albert. While I certainly do enjoy forming the Mudvug Dojo in WrestleMania 2000 in order to take out anyone who dares to step up to the plate, doing the same match over and over again can become quite dull and a bit boring. Thankfully, you can play more than one season mode simultaneously, so you do have the ability to switch it up every now and then, but there's definitely a lack of variety here, and it gets a little annoying playing the same matches over and over again. The Road to WrestleMania modes where you'll unlock new characters such as Shawn Michaels, Jerry Lawler, Dude Love and Cactus Jack, so if you want the full roster, you will need to play through this mode. Personally speaking, I prefer to set up exhibition matches instead, but again, it's an improvement over Revenge, so you can't be too harsh. No Mercy story mode is leagues better than Road to WrestleMania mode though, so you might play this nowadays and wish you were playing something else instead. So why would someone want to play WrestleMania 2000 instead of any other wrestling game released on the Nintendo 64? Nostalgia. It's nostalgia. It plays a huge factor in anything remotely retro, and this is greatly enforced if you had a personal connection with the game all those years ago, like nearly 25 years ago, my god. For many people, it will not matter that the game's been surpassed, it won't matter that other games offer more. If WrestleMania 2000 was a game they loved when growing up, then it'll always have a special place with them, and that kind of value is unmeasurable and incomparable. I can kinda look at the AKI wrestling games the same way I look at the original Street Fighter 2 games, so let me explain. Street Fighter 2 is the blueprint for the magnificence that would soon follow. Street Fighter 2 Hyperfighting fixed a lot of issues people had with the first game, increasing the game speed and adding elements that should have been in the original. I know Champion Edition came out before this by the way, but just bear with me here. Super Street Fighter 2 added even more new characters and new cool moves, but they messed up by bringing the speed back down, kinda taking away what was already available. But then Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo added the speed back while also perfecting the formula to give the ultimate experience. The thing is, which one of these games do you think I enjoyed the most? I got Super Street Fighter 2 for Christmas one year and I absolutely adored that game. I played it so much that even today I still find myself going back to it even though I know Super Turbo's a superior game. The same rings true for fans of WrestleMania 2000. They don't care if things were removed that were included in Virtual Pro Wrestling 2. It's all about having a little nostalgia for the game and that's what makes it better. Another big factor too, I think, is the multiplayer aspect. If you played a ton of WrestleMania 2000 two-player games with your friends but kinda moved on when No Mercy came out, then you're gonna have better memories of playing WrestleMania 2000 because nothing beats the multiplayer experience of these classic AKI games. When WCW Revenge came out, my buddy and I played it to absolute death, trying to beat our top match scores by having extremely long tag team matches and having all sorts of banter while playing against each other one-on-one. Those kind of experiences can't be recreated no matter how good the next game is, and so for many folks, just popping in a copy of WrestleMania 2000 and seeing the menu screen will be more than enough to remind them of the good times. In short, there's no wrong answer when it comes to your favourite wrestling game, and the same rings true for absolutely everything in regards to pro wrestling. I've said this before in my pay-per-view videos, but just because the general consensus says something's mediocre or bad, it doesn't mean it's mediocre or bad for you personally. There's loads of things I enjoy that I know deep down's absolutely shit, but because it brings back memories or there's some other personal connection I have to it that others don't, then it's gonna mean more to me in comparison to everyone else. This is why I feel WrestleMania 2000 shouldn't be dismissed when looking at the entire N64 wrestling library. I know folks who enjoy this game immensely, and even though I prefer something else, it doesn't mean the game doesn't hold any value. It just so happens that others find more value in the game, and that's pretty awesome. Not gonna lie, putting this video together kinda makes me want to go back and redo the WCW World Tour and WCW Revenge videos. I've no idea why I decided to lump both games together, and looking back at that video, I know I could do better. As a matter of fact, I want to delete it because I feel it's pretty bad, but I'll leave it up for now, and maybe I'll cover those WCW games again in the future. I'll leave it for a while though, because I'd be treading over some of the same ground I covered in this video you're watching right now. Thanks very much for checking this one out though. Like the video if you enjoyed it, tell me some of your WrestleMania 2000 memories in the comment section, and I'll see you all for the next upload. Take care everyone. Hey everyone, someone commented on another wrestling game video that I put together asking me where the No Mercy upload was, and I honestly thought I'd already covered the game before. I've looked at the WCW N64 games briefly and even the excellent WCW Feel the Bang mod, but I'm yet to cover No Mercy on the Wrestling Bios channel, so that's the plan today. WWF No Mercy, the final AKI wrestling game on N64, is the end of a journey really. The last ride for probably the best series of wrestling games to ever get released on home consoles. From WCW World Tour right up to No Mercy, N64 owners had all the bragging rights. The AKI games were simply the best way to experience professional wrestling through video games, and No Mercy took everything that was learned prior and packaged it all together, delivering what many still consider today as the very best wrestling game that's ever been released. By the time No Mercy hit the shelves, I'd gotten myself an N64, but I was also at the age where I wasn't into wrestling as much as I used to be. Everyone goes through it, you still watch the big shows and you follow along with what's going on, but it isn't your main priority. Other things are way more important, and you find better ways of spending your free time. It isn't just wrestling fans who go through that either, it happens with all sorts of fandoms. But that being said, when I got my copy of No Mercy, my free time was completely taken up once again by this wonderful thing we call professional wrestling, and I was hooked. I loved the WCW AKI games. The Japanese virtual pro wrestling games are something I would have loved too, but I don't know enough about those games to confidently talk about them, and I'm also not going to try and pretend I know everything about those games without actually taking the time to sit and play them, and I mean actually properly play them. But WCW vs NWO World Tour and WCW Revenge were my favourite wrestling games growing up, and seeing the progression made by the time No Mercy came around was just incredible. I also know that WrestleMania 2000 came out before No Mercy, but gonna be honest, I skipped that game completely. I didn't own the N64 when WrestleMania 2000 came out, and none of my buddies picked it up either, so that's a game I only dabbled in through emulation, but one day I am gonna play it properly. The way I saw it back then, there was no real point playing Mania 2000 if I had No Mercy, but I've been reading quite a bit too that WrestleMania 2000 shouldn't be slept on, and so I plan on giving it a proper playthrough very soon. Also, I know Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 is considered the pinnacle for many gamers. I understand it's a fucking sin not to mention VPW2 in an AKI video, but again, I'm not going to pretend I know the game inside out when I haven't played it enough to give my honest thoughts. But I do plan on spending a lot of time with Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 because I don't want to half-ass it when I make that video. Anyway, here we are once again. I've been playing No Mercy quite a bit to prepare for this video, and it still holds up incredibly well today. Let's get started as we take a look at AKI's final wrestling game on N64. Let's take a brief look at the AKI N64 games released in the States and in Europe before No Mercy. I think it's important to see how things progressed and how things improved with every game. When we go back and play WCW vs NWO World Tour nowadays, it doesn't look like much. Models look a little blocky, faces are flat and some are unrecognisable. Textures overall look very simple, it's all a little basic. However, back then, when you first put that cartridge into your N64 and you witnessed the greatness of World Tour's opening video, it was one of the best things in the world. What you have to remember is that WCW fans hadn't gotten a video game since Super Brawl on the Super Nintendo, so seeing this kind of thing was a dream come true for many followers of WCW. AKI had brought WCW vs the World to PlayStation consoles. Ukes had also released Power Move Pro Wrestling to PlayStations in the States and Europe, but WCW World Tour revolutionized professional wrestling games forever with its simple yet extremely addictive gameplay engine. engine. World Tour was intuitive, anyone could pick it up and play a few matches. It was a whole lot of fun, and simply, it was a better experience than the games that came before it. The following year, WCW Revenge hit the shelves, and it took everything that made World Tour great and made it even better. Revenge made World Tour feel like a demo. Revenge also felt like a much more authentic WCW experience with its bigger roster, championship belts, and its selection of pay-per-view arenas. The gameplay itself was updated, with animations feeling a bit more smooth and characters being given more moves that reflected their real-life counterparts. It could sometimes feel like characters played the same in World Tour, whereas in Revenge you could see a bit more care was taken, with much more accurate signature moves, finishing moves and taunts. Matches just flowed better, and while the fundamentals of World Tour were held over, the additional moves and animations made Revenge a much more complete wrestling experience. I can't say enough good things about WCW NWO Revenge. It's a game I have a ton of nostalgia for, and I could probably say I had more fun with Revenge when compared to No Mercy, but that's strictly a personal thing too, because my fandom was at an all-time high when Revenge came out. While Acclaim was working on WWF Attitude, they were hit with some pretty bad news. Their partnership with the World Wrestling Federation was over, and the WWF would be partnering up with THQ and AKI, the guys who brought wrestling brilliance to the N64. It's been said that WCW did not want to share developer with the WWF, and it was WCW's decision to end their relationship with THQ and AKI, but more information became public since the release of Guy Evans' Nitro book. According to THQ's senior vice president of licensing and merchandising at the time, there was a dispute regarding royalties, and WCW were given $10 million with a $5 million down payment to move development duties to Electronic Arts. THQ still planned on releasing WCW games that were already in development. WCW NWO Live on PlayStation, a localized version of New Japan Pro Wrestling Token Retsuden 3 by Yuke's, was scheduled for a release, but it never saw the light of day. Instead, THQ released WCW Thunder on PS1 by Inland Productions. This served as the final WCW game released by the publisher. They also released WCW Nitro on N64 in the same month, a game that had released a year prior on PlayStation consoles. Kinda makes you think they'd been sitting on Nitro for N64 for months and they didn't really have any desire to release it initially. That same year though, AKI and THQ released WWF WrestleMania 2000 on N64, a game that shared its engine almost exactly with Virtual Pro Wrestling 2, and fans of the WCW N64 games could now have those same matches, only this time it would be with a WWF roster. Along with the expected upgrades to graphics, animations and moves, a story mode was presented for the first time in an English AKI wrestling game. The story mode was pretty linear, but still, it would have been something that I would have loved back in the day. Once you won all the belts in Revenge, you were left with trying to get high scores in matches, which by the way was a lot of fun, especially in multiplayer, but anything that adds to the single player experience would have been very, very welcome. WrestleMania 2000 did have graphical updates, but, and I'm just calling it as I see it here, the upgrades weren't overly impressive. The game looked great for its time, no doubt, but compared to Revenge, I'd say they look pretty similar. No Mercy, on the other hand, looked graphically superior in every way possible. Boot up No Mercy and you get a great intro video showcasing the wrestlers involved in the game. Once you get into the main menu, you'll hear a song that'll stick in your head forever, though you gotta click into Exhibition to hear it in all its glory.
Breaking, diggity dog.
We're going to come back out here soon and look at the modes and options available, but first let's look at gameplay. Now, something that was removed from No Mercy were full entrances. In WrestleMania 2000 you could watch your wrestlers step inside the ropes, but in No Mercy we only see characters on the rampway. For me, this really isn't a big deal. The lack of CD quality audio already made entrances feel a little rough anyway, so I don't think cutting entrances short was a big loss. Immediately though, you can see the difference in terms terms of graphics. Wrestlers don't look nearly as blocky as before, with much more polygons getting spared for our favourite grapplers. The face textures are still a little weird, but you can't really knock these games for textures and whatnot. It's just the way things were, and besides, the character faces have a certain charm to them, even going back to the WCW games. Arenas look bigger. In the previous games, it could sometimes feel like you were wrestling in front of a very small audience and it felt a little claustrophobic, but No Mercy completely fixes that issue with more fans on the ground floor and larger arenas for the ring to sit in. No Mercy has a complete graphical overhaul with everything simply looking better. Everything is proportioned correctly this time around, from the arena to the ring right down to the superstars themselves. Small touches are included everywhere that we take for granted nowadays, such as proper turnbuckle pads. Gameplay is what you'd expect. It takes what made the previous games good and added small improvements such as running grapples and a new weapon system. There's a wider variety of moves and taunts available. It feels smoother to play with animations getting tweaked or completely overhauled. And once again, it's easy for newcomers and a few advanced techniques are added for veterans. A complaint I've seen online is that the AI can be a little cheap in No Mercy sometimes, and it feels like moves get countered a bit too often. I agree, moves do seem to get reversed more frequently, but it doesn't take anything away from the game. All in all, when you start your journey off at WCW vs NWO World Tour and you reach WWF No Mercy, you'll feel like you're playing an absolute complete product. You're seeing how the developers matured along with the console, and you can see the developers reach their peak. It honestly feels like there's nothing more that could have been added in terms of gameplay, with the engine being perfected in No Mercy. There's no stepping backwards, everything about No Mercy just looks and plays better. Now, I said earlier I prefer WCW Revenge, and that's still very true, but that's mainly because of the roster and how it captures that particular era of WCW so well. I've just got a soft spot for it, but I'll still admit that No Mercy looks and plays much better, and that's without looking at the serious amount of extra modes and match types available. If Revenge looked and played exactly like No Mercy and it contained all the extra options and modes, it would have been my personal absolute perfect game. Okay, so I already had this video completed and ready for upload, but I thought I'd add this bit right here because a ton of people talked about this one specific problem with No Mercy once I announced this video on social media. The initial copies of No Mercy had a save bug, and this affected both NTSC and PAL versions of the game. What's more, it looked like it affected a whole lot of people, and some didn't go back to the game when the game glitched out. Basically, the bug would wipe out your game save, and it could happen at any time, and No Mercy had to go through a recall, not too dissimilar to WrestleMania 21 on Xbox that we talked about earlier in the week. THQ issued new copies of the game for those who returned their buggy cartridges, and you can tell if you've got a new copy by looking at the product code on the cartridge. You'll see a number 1 beside USA or EU. Many people I spoke to had bad copies of the game, and it's only fair to bring this up too, seeing as WrestleMania 21 got annihilated in my other video for glitches and bugs. My old copy of No Mercy didn't have the save glitch, and I didn't even know there was a glitch until years later. Blissful ignorance, but I'm sure a lot of people were frustrated who bought the game on day one. It looks like the glitch-free cartridge in the States is pretty hard to come by nowadays, and copies on eBay are ridiculously expensive, though PAL copies are much more reasonably priced. But there's a caveat to owning the updated PAL version: the blood was removed. It's been reported that blood was removed so copies could get sold in Germany. A few other N64 games were rejected due to showing blood, and so THQ and AKI were just preempting any chance of the same happening with No Mercy. My advice, if you really want to play on a console and you're not a hardcore collector, just buy an EverDrive cartridge and save the money. Either that or keep checking eBay and hope someone sells a USA 1 variant without knowing what they have. With all that being said, let's get back to looking at why No Mercy was so awesome. Trying to pinpoint what made No Mercy so good from a gameplay perspective is quite tough without breaking everything down to its very core, right down to what each button does. I'm not going to do that in this video because while I could tell you about how great the simplified controls are, how easy it is to hold buttons for strong strikes and grapples and all that, there's just no way you can put into words how addictive No Mercy is without playing it yourself. Even though the button layout is simple and easy to understand, somehow it feels rewarding when pulling off moves, and I think a lot of that has to do with how good the moves look. Again, it's hard to explain, but the moves feel like they have weight and a lot of impact, something that seems hard for developers to properly implement even today. Simple grapples look great and No Mercy, the satisfaction you get when timing a hard strike too is awesome, and landing a finisher after working hard to fill up the spirit meter is very gratifying too. Matches feel like epic encounters and there's so much variety in the movesets that you'll never get bored, even when playing through a championship or story mode. There's nothing worse when starting a career or story mode in a wrestling game and you get bored with your character halfway through. You begin rushing through things to reach the end, and you even end up diverting yourself away from season mode in order to play exhibitions just to change things up. Not once did I feel that way with No Mercy. Still, if you wanted to choose other superstars, you had a great selection available. So let's check out the full unlocked roster before checking out the match types and modes available, areas where No Mercy truly shines. If we count every single character, including the character skins that are found in No Mercy, we have got a whopping 74 characters to choose from. You've got The Rock, Steve Austin, Mankind, The Undertaker, Triple H, Kane, The Hardy Boys, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Kurt Angle, Chris Jericho, X-Pac, Taz, The Outlaws, The McMahons. It's probably the very best Attitude roster ever featured in a WWF game. Each character slot also has 4 attires, all of which can be edited, and some hidden wrestlers are actually skins of wrestlers already included in the game. The top of the card is represented here right down to the bottom. There's plenty to like about the roster, and at the time the game was released there wouldn't have been any complaints. Each wrestler also has their own stats. There's a much bigger emphasis here on wrestlers playing and feeling different from one another, and we'll look into this a bit more when we explore the creation modes. But these aren't a bunch of character models who just have a few different moves. Learning what your wrestler's good at and learning where their strengths are will help you understand the best way to play with that particular superstar. Alright, let's see the match types we have. We've got a standard exhibition, Royal Rumble matches, a pay-per-view mode, a King of the Ring mode, special guest referee matches, ladder matches, and Iron Man matches. Pay-per-view mode lets you set up your own pay-per-view events, pretty straightforward. King of the Ring mode lets you set up different tournament types, including ladder and cage matches. Cage matches are only available as one-on-one singles, by the way. There are no multi-man cage matches. And you can set these up by going into exhibition and then selecting cage match. There's one thing missing here though, and that's the Hell in a Cell match. There was a lot of talk about cell matches possibly making it into No Mercy, but I'm unsure if that was just fan speculation. Regardless, there's no cell matches available in No Mercy, and that's a shame. Ladder matches are alright, nothing special. It's a little comical how wrestlers take bumps when on the ladder, but generally speaking, the ladder matches play out just fine. It's all about button mashing when you get to the top of the ladder. The faster you tap buttons, the better chance you have of grabbing the briefcase. The same rings true for cage matches. You can use the cage to hurt your opponent, but when trying to climb out, it's all about tapping buttons as quickly as possible. Your spirit meter also depletes as you try to leave the cage, so you gotta be careful and leave the cage when you're ready to. Iron Man matches don't need an explanation, neither do guest referee matches. But I do wish special guest referee matches would return in WWE 2K games. Being the special guest referee in a heated online game between two legit good players would be a lot of fun. Just like HBK at SummerSlam 1997, I'd call it right down the middle. You've also got your usual triple threat tag team and handicap matches available. The Royal Rumble mode allows 4 players in the ring at the same time, and really that's it for the match types. It doesn't sound like much now, but back then this was pretty varied, and playing new match types with the AKI engine was both intriguing and a lot of fun. But I will admit that these games really shined in simple, no-nonsense 1-on-1 or 2-on-2 matchups, especially in multiplayer. The fundamentals were absolutely mastered here, so no gimmicks were necessary, although they are a welcome bonus. Oh, before I forget, this is pretty important too. You can fight backstage in No Mercy. This is the first time a WWF game let you fight backstage. Championship mode then, what an absolute treat this was. What we have here is something special. The replay value is completely off the charts. Choose a championship belt you'd like to compete for, choose an eligible superstar, and then begin your road to the belt. No Mercy uses a branching story system, and you'll also get a storyline map as you progress. You don't need to win every match. As a matter of fact, you're going to need to lose quite a few matches if you want to 100% this thing. And you'll also be given specific tasks every now and then during matches that can also alter the path your superstar takes to get the championship belt. There's a lot to do here. Remember, you have 7 belts to choose from, and each belt has its own storyline map or storyline tree. There's even a storyline for defending the championship if you go back and select the same superstar as before. So there's lots to do here, and at the time, this was the absolute best single player experience available in any wrestling game to date. There's multiple ways for you to win that championship belt, and while the dialogue and little cutscenes may not look like much today, back then this was the absolute pinnacle. Some championship belts have much more complex storyline maps, and you can save some money by unlocking superstars in championship mode that are also available for purchase inside the shop. If you decide to go back to No Mercy today, I'd recommend checking out the storyline FAQs available online that will guide you to the unlockable characters. But if you want the real experience, just play it blind and see what happens when you win or lose matches. You never know which hidden superstar may show up at the end of your journey. There's also a single player survival mode available. This is a gauntlet mode where you'll go up against 99 characters. Rules are similar to the Royal Rumble where it's every man for themselves, though eliminations can also happen via pinfall, submission, and TKO. Hidden wrestlers can also be unlocked in survival mode, however, you have to be the one who eliminates the hidden character. If the CPU does it, then you won't get that superstar unlocked. You can see there's quite a few ways to unlock the hidden wrestlers in the game. You can do it via championship mode, survival mode, or spending in-game currency. Alright, let's take a trip to the SmackDown Mall and see what's going on there. In the shop, you can purchase new Create a Wrestler parts, including classic attires for wrestlers currently in the game. Remember, each superstar has 4 attire slots, so you can create new versions of superstars included in the game pretty easily. There's also a ton of moves available for purchase, with quite a few of these being finishers you'd find in the WCW games. You can find a lot of revenge and virtual pro wrestling holdovers in the creation mode, making it pretty easy to create superstars you found in the old AKI games. You can also buy superstars here if you can't be asked unlocking them through championship and survival mode, but be warned, some of the prices are absolutely ridiculous. There's a few arenas available here too, and some weapons and props. Plenty of unlockables here, and unlike other wrestling games I've played recently, it's all mostly stuff you'd actually want to own, stuff that actually expands the game a little. The real magic can be found in Superstar data though. Let's take a look at the Superstar edit mode. And check this out, practically everything about a superstar's appearance can be changed. From their name to their clothing, practically everything about how a wrestler looks can be modified. No other wrestling game offered this amount of customization before, and you could spend hours just in this mode messing around with a wrestler's attire and updating their gear. This was awesome back in the day, and it still is now. We can't edit a superstar's moves, fighting styles, or allies and enemies, but it's worth taking a look here to see where a superstar's strengths and weaknesses are. Jericho here has good speed, expert submission skills, he has a normal reaction to blood, a normal jumping distance with a good aerial offense rating of 4. His weakest body part is his head, with all other parts being fairly average. All this information lets us know how a superstar plays, and it also lets us know how we should attack the player to do the most damage. So for Jericho, focus on the head and keep him away from aerial attacks. We can also see his main rivals and who, if anyone, would accompany him to the ring. This is for interference mainly, and to be honest, I usually turn interference off. But you can see there's quite a lot going on here, and for an N64 game, it's pretty impressive. I believe there's a lot of similar things going on in Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 on N64, but again, I don't know enough about that game to comment. If you want to edit Jericho's moves, the best thing you can do is clone him, but this clone version of Jericho won't be featured in Championship mode. Still, it's a good alternative if you want to switch up a superstar's moves and relationships. Create a Wrestler lets you make your own superstar with the parts available in-game or parts you've bought in the store. Loads of moves are available too, and you should have no problem making somewhat recognizable superstars who aren't in the game. I suck at these modes though, always have, and I always mention it when I upload a video that has a Create a Wrestler mode. The stable editor allows you to change the categories in the player select screen, letting you separate wrestlers into their own groups like the way WCW Revenge had the NWO, the Wolfpack and the Flock. The sheer amount of customizations available in No Mercy make it an instant winner for those who like to edit their game. And you gotta remember too that fans weren't used to getting this amount of customization options inside a video game. It's nothing short of brilliant. I knew before putting this video together that I wouldn't be able to do No Mercy justice, and now that I think about it, that's probably the reason why I've put this off for so long. You can watch videos all day about No Mercy and you can watch the best of the best playing through the entire game, but nothing compares to actually playing it and experiencing it for yourself. This is a game, in order to appreciate it, you can't watch, you have to play it. As mentioned earlier, No Mercy is the end of the AKI journey on N64. It started off good with WCW World Tour, and it ended perfectly with No Mercy. The developer's experience is on full display here, and it's not just through the gameplay, but the options given to the player too, the presentation, how it all looks. It's such a complete game. AKI would go on to create the awesome Def Jam games, and they also put out Ultimate Muscle on the GameCube, but they ended their N64 run on the highest note possible by leaving fans with what's still considered today as the greatest wrestling game ever made. For many of us too, it was the final game we got into on the N64 console. No Mercy was the last game on the system that I spent a lot of time with, and capturing this footage really made me miss that console. This was all captured on an emulator, of course, so I ended up buying an N64 with World Tour, Revenge and No Mercy, and at the time of scripting this video, I'm waiting for it to arrive in the post. I just need to get myself a good old CRT TV and I'll be all good. That's the effect No Mercy had on me just by revisiting it today, and it shows how much nostalgia I have for the game. So even if I didn't do the game justice today in this video, at least I ended up with the console and the game again. If you've never played No Mercy, even if you've watched countless videos on the game, do yourself a favour and give it a shot. I guarantee you won't regret it. Thanks for watching this one, and take care.